Well, welcome to Bible study for today. We are going to hopefully make it through 2 chapters of Revelations. I know that's going to be our goal for today. We'll see if it actually happens. But they're shorter, and they're sort of in the same. They're talking about the same thing. So, if you remember the last time, we talked about the different churches, and so again, you can look at that. So as we keep going through Revelations, I'm going to keep talking about different viewpoints because we got to remember that there's a lot of different ways you can look at this stuff, and so and that still happens with what happens today. We're also going to see that this viewpoint that you're going to read today has a particular viewpoint as a Christian. So John is a what type of Christian? He's not a Baptist. He's not a Lutheran. What were the big 2 differentiation types of Christians back when John was alive? You were either blank or blank type of Christian. You're what?
Catholic or Protestant?
No, not Catholic or Protestant.
Jewish?
No.
Jewish or Gentile.
Gentile.
So, and John was a what? What do you think John was? You got 50-50. Jewish. John was Jewish. So what we're going to read today is a Jewish Christian's perspective, and you're going to see that sort of in full force as we read through the description, because you're going to see a lot of stuff from Judaism sort of helping us see who God is from that framework. So as we look at the description of the throne room today and what's happening, you're going to notice it's very much from a Jewish perspective. So I want you to keep that in mind as we read through the text and sort of ask yourself when you hear sort of description of what God looks like and stuff like that, how is that a Jewish Christian perspective versus a Gentile Christian perspective? And the other stuff, like I said, it'll all sort of work its way through. So as we remember, too, we got done with all the messages to the 7 churches, and so this happens right after the message to the 7 churches. So that's something to keep in mind as well, too. So the message, and we know the messages from the 7 churches can be looked at from a first century perspective as well as a church now perspective. So that's something I want you to keep in mind. So let's read chapter 4. So I think that worked pretty well if we just did 1 chapter and we'll talk about it and see what happens. So how many verses here? We got 11. So how about someone read the first 5 verses and the other person can read the rest of them. So first 5, chapter 4.
Yep. Oh, go ahead.
Who's first?
Everybody wants to read?
That's good.
I'm not going to read first.
After this I looked, and lo, in heaven an open door. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up hither, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the Spirit, and lo, a throne stood in heaven, with one seated on the throne. And he who sat there appeared like jasper and carnelian, and round the throne was a rainbow that looked like an emerald. Round the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clad in white garments, with golden crowns upon their heads. From the throne issued flashes of lightning and voices and peals of thunder. And before the throne burned 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God.
6 through 11.
Before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal, and in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion. The second living creature was like a calf. The third living creature had a face like a man. And the fourth living creature was that of a flying eagle. The 4 living creatures, each having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within. And they did not rest day or night, saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sit on the throne, who lives forever and ever. The 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For you created all things, and by your will they will exist and were created.
All right. So interesting stuff.
Creepy, I think.
Creepy. Okay.
The one
Okay. So tell me, what is creepy about it?
All those eyes looking at you and constantly saying something.
Is this more symbolism then?
It's all symbolism. So
And my Bible says an ox instead of a
Yeah.
calf.
Yep.
Says
Yep.
what?
Ox. Ox.
Still bovine.
Yeah.
No, seriously. Dude, you got 4 seconds.
Lion. He's like a man.
Yep. And so I'm going to ask you. I'm going to grab my power cord because this thing is dying on me. I'm going to ask you guys, what book of the Bible? I know some of you've been in Bible study for a little while. Has the same description of those creatures. Very similar description. We read it during the summer. We did a whole book study on it. So I'm going to ask. Good answer. Good answers.
But that's, we did the study on it
Yeah.
last summer.
So find it in Ezekiel. I want you to look at Ezekiel and see the description's different but very similar. So I'll be right back. Was because
We're gonna go under the table, right?
yeah, we're going on to say.
Here, throw it at me, okay?
All right.
You go to your side. Take that.
What?
It's the same.
Each had 4 faces and each of them had 4 wings.
Yeah. So it's a little different than.
Just look at it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So not creepy.
I get
That's
it.
a pervert.
There we go.
Warning.
I thought I had plenty of power, but I
And
guess
these
I didn't.
sparkles.
Yeah. So the other thing with this in terms of this story, this is sort of when God was in the temple and left the temple and that type of stuff. So the vision that we're seeing today is one where the stuff that we're seeing from John isn't something that John's making up, but it's something that's previously held out in Scripture. So I think that's important to realize is that this isn't something that there's not any precedent for. So when we think of those creepy creatures, what we're really looking at is beings that have been shown to be in the Bible before. So why do you think they're covered with eyes?
All seen.
All seeing. Yeah. Yep. That's exactly it. They're all seeing. So let's see, which chapter am I in? So what else about this part of the text? So I talked earlier about this being somebody who's Jewish, who's a Jewish Christian. How can you tell that flavor from the text? Especially when you read it from the perspective of God.
Repeat that.
So how do we know that this is a Jewish Christian who's writing about the text? There's something about the way that he describes God that is very much in line with how the Jewish people view God.
Holy, 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 the Lord Almighty.
Yep, there's that. But what's the physical description of God?
Oh,
Well, the white garment though is on the elders.
Yep. So from this picture that John portrays to you, you could sketch out an image of God, right? No, you can't.
It's everything around it.
It's everything around God. So in the Jewish tradition, what's the name for God?
It's unpronounceable.
You can't pronounce it. It's intentional. You can't pronounce it. Now you have a Jewish Christian trying to describe to you what God looks like, and he doesn't do it. he has every opportunity in this vision to see the face of God and say, yeah, God is a guy that has a red mustache, a handlebar mustache. And he's got, ponytail, and he's got, Harley stuff on. We don't get any description of God. And that's intentional because we're dealing with someone who's Jewish, it's a Jewish Christian. And it's through that faith tradition that you do not describe God. So I think that's interesting thing to be aware of as you look at this is
But he did describe the voice as like a trumpet,
he did.
but we don't know if it's God that's talking.
Correct. You could make the inference it's Christ that's talking. So I think that's interesting. And it's also interesting that John, who remember, if we remember where John is at, John is in exile on an island. He's not the high priest or anything like that. He's basically for lack of a better term, he's a nobody. He's on an island, and yet he has this vision of God, and so that's a very interesting thing as well too. That there's this. He has this grand vision of who God is. And so I think that's another thing to keep in mind too, so you have John, who's a Jewish Christian. He has this grand image of who God is. So let's talk a little bit about how, since he doesn't describe God physically. He does do some other things though to help us see who this being is and to give us some guidance as to who is on the throne. So what are some things that we notice about God? Since we don't get a physical description of God, we get other physical descriptions. What are some other physical things that we hear or see about God?
Well, there's that rainbow like emerald and
Yep. So what do you think the rainbow symbolizes?
God's promise not to flood the earth again.
Yep, God's promise not to flood the earth again. So, and we also see these jewels. So that's an important thing. So the jewels actually mean something, and I'll read you what those. So these three jewels are actually held in pretty honorable place in antiquity. So back in that day, people thought highly of these jewels. So modern jasper is opaque. So the stone that they might be describing in the text is more likely maybe a diamond. The cardinal or gem was a blood red stone named after Sardis, where it was found. And then you have the emerald. Let's see, jasper has been associated with such qualities as majesty, holiness, or purity. Cardinal has been interpreted in connection with wrath or judgment. And emerald is for mercy. So those are what those three different gems potentially could mean. What else do we know about what is God sitting on?
just a throne.
God's sitting on a throne. And believe it or not, the throne as a word is used 40 times in Revelations. So we talk a lot about God's throne in the book of Revelations, more so than I think than any other book. So that's,
Came flashes of lightning and rumblings and sounds of heaven.
yep. And so what story would people associate with that?
Moses?
Yeah, Moses. Yeah, in the Mount Sinai. Or you can think of that too when God was that pillar of fire and walking them through the desert. There was times that God used a booming voice and stuff like that. So all the stuff so when the people are reading this, again, Jewish Christian especially, as they look at this, they're going to lean into on their Judaism and they're going to see this description of God, and it fits really well with what they've known already. So this isn't a surprising view of who God is. And again, we're taking, we'll get to the animals here in a couple seconds again, but we're taking stuff that was familiar to them and having them give us a description that way. So it's not, so we look at this text as creepy. We look at this text as very unworldly, but for the people who would be reading this text, this would be very comforting because they would know these people. I mean, sort of think of what are some things that, if you think of an image, today, how, if we had somebody from the 1920s look at, well, actually, since Marvel's here, but if we had somebody from the 1820s, there we go, who would look at our lives today, and they'd have a description of the future times, of walking in a room and there's a big box that people are looking at. Some of this stuff to them would look very magical, would look very unique. Or if us looking back into the 1820s and seeing what they had for like gas lighting and stuff like that, we would be, oh, this is really neat, but that's what they're comfortable with. That's what we're comfortable with. And this image that John is giving to the audience who's reading this is something they're comfortable with. So does that sort of make sense? And so, like I said, and the throne of God has been used a lot in Scripture as well too. What do you think the throne really symbolizes in this text?
Heaven?
The Spirit sends forth.
Close. Sovereignty of God. How God is sovereign. So how God is Lord over all. So that really reminds us of that. So if you want some extra parts of where you can find this, you can find, I saw God seated on the throne, high and exalted, is the testimony of Isaiah from Isaiah 6, chapter 1. The psalmists sing, God reigns over the nation. God is seated on his holy throne. That's from Psalm chapter 47, verse 8. So again, you're seeing that John is using imagery that people will be familiar with. So, and so then we'll talk about the four living creatures that we see, the ones that are really creepy, are sort of, they're not the same as the creatures, they're similar. So what's one difference between the creatures from Revelations and the creatures from Ezekiel, if you remember?
4 and 7. And they have 4.
Yep, there's just 4 here. Mm-hmm. And then how many faces does the angels or the creatures in Ezekiel have? 4. So yeah, so in Revelation they just have a face. In Ezekiel they have 4. Each being has 4 faces. And then how many wings? So the other big difference is wings. How many wings are in Revelations?
6.
How many wings are in Ezekiel? 4. So those are some differences. Is that a big deal? Probably not. But you at least are familiar with the imagery. It's sort of a, so.
Why is it so difficult then to study Revelations when we've had it back in parts of the Bible? I mean, but when we get to Revelations, we just kind of, can't.
Because one, it's a vision, so visions are hard to interpret. It's not an easy thing to do, to interpret visions. And I think the other thing too is so that the way, when people, we have a lot more distractions nowadays. We don't know our Bibles as well. We don't know the stories as well. Like I said, one time I asked the confirmation kids, talk to me about David and Goliath, and they're like, who? I'm like, and that's, and I, so one of the reasons I don't do the Revised Common Lectionary, which is one way we can go through the Bible, which talks that gives you like 3 or 4 different verses you can go through a week, actually per day, but on Sundays you can go up to 4. You can have a first reading, a second reading, a psalm, and then a gospel. If you're wondering why don't we go back to doing that, it's because we don't know the stories to begin with. So I feel like the reason I like the narrative lectionary, it gives you a complete story for that Sunday, so people can remember the stories, and it does a good job of talking about the big stories throughout the Bible. And I think right now, I think if you would look at our congregation, and any congregation in general, I'm not just going to point us out, most people couldn't tell you what was out of Ezekiel. Most people couldn't tell you what's out of Genesis. Most people don't know the book of Exodus very well, and some of those are very well-known books. And I would make the argument that most people don't know the difference between the book of Mark and the book of John. You know, if I would ask people and say, or even if I'd ask you guys, so what's some of the big differences between Mark and John? You'd all look at me like, what? and so when we go to, so then when you have people look at Revelations, now you're having people, so if and this is not, like I said, I'm not trying to shame people and say, oh, we're horrible people. I mean, that's just the way it is right now, you know. Back when our Jewish brothers and sisters and even the early Christians, this is the book you had. This is what you talked about every day. This is, you know, and even then, they didn't know all the Bible either because the Bible wasn't even put together back when Jesus was alive. You know, they had scripts of Torah that they had put together, and different communities had different Torah that they would read. And same with the early churches. All the churches did not have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You know, each church had their favorite gospel. And they said, hey, we're a community that follows Mark. Or, hey, we're a community that follows Matthew. And it wasn't until the 300s that someone was like, hey, we should probably make a book about this and put it together. And then, well, hey, we'll number it because in the original Bible, there was no numbers. You know, so you had, and so that's what happened is they put the book together. And so I think we forget about a lot of this sort of stuff, you know. And so as people look back on this text of Revelations, we're like scratching our head because we don't know. It's sort of like if we're trying to take a calculus class and we don't know basic mathematics. You know, calculus is going to seem like who created this? This is totally weird. This is totally bizarre. But we don't have the foundation in order to make a good call on this. And so now you have people who are writing books about Revelations who don't have a cursory knowledge of the Bible, and they look at this from a very literal way of viewing things, and then you wonder why people freak out and think that the end of the world is happening the next day is because, or they don't understand the imagery is because they don't understand the rest of the Bible. So.
As far as,
And then,
go ahead.
and then television came.
And television came, yeah.
It's much easier to go and watch Price is Right.
It is, and honestly,
game.
yeah.
Now you got Netflix.
Yeah, and there's not this. And so the other thing too is people were really struggling during the time that most of the scripture was written. You're very survival. You didn't know if you were going to survive every day. You didn't know what meal. You don't know where your meal was coming from. You didn't know if you would be able to sleep through the night because you didn't know if you'd be attacked by either animals or other people. I mean, it was very much your survival was very much dependent on what happened every day. So having a God that would help with that was really key. So,
Sunday school, we learned the Bible stories.
Yeah.
But I don't ever remember a Bible story about Revelations. Unless, Jesus was resurrected, and that was kind of the end.
Yeah, right. And especially within the Lutheran Church, we're very much afraid of the Holy Spirit. And so we don't try to talk about the Holy Spirit very much because that's for those Pentecostal people. We don't have our hands above our shoulders any times at all.
Heck,
So.
I'm sitting in the back and I can't even see anybody in the congregation swaying to the My Dad song. It's like, come on. There was a few people kind of like this, but it wasn't very many.
We were tapping our toes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
You
what
couldn't
it was.
see it.
Inside, I was just running.
Our spirits were
Exactly.
But afraid to show it.
Yeah,
So funny.
Singing with it was good.
and
He was singing with it.
yeah, but I think you've seen and the way that the gospel has been transmitted over a period of time, in the early times of how our country was formed, very much it was more law than gospel. Your sermons were about fire and brimstone, how you all were going to hell. Yeah, it was all about judgment. And so And then people finally figured out, thank you, Martin Luther, you know, and even with Martin Luther, people still were having a hard time figuring out what joy, how to live, you know, and so they taught in the early time, at least like with the Puritans and the early churches here, that again, that people work with fear. And so, yeah, so you have a lot of different ways that the gospel has been transmitted, how it's been working, and sort of it'd be interesting to do a study of how church has changed from the time that America has founded to where we're at today, because I think the American experience with our religion has something to play in with how we perceive God, how we perceive these different books of the Bible. You know, not to mention all the stuff that happened before it came over to the Americas. But I think that's all interesting type of stuff. So does that answer your question a little bit? So, but anything else? Anybody else? So that's why this text is really unfamiliar to us, is because people don't go back and look at it through historical times, and we just don't know the books. We just don't know the books. And again, that's not shaming or blaming. That's just where we're at. And so, because again, we can watch The Price is Right. You know, why would we want to study Revelations?
Yeah.
And it's got scary stuff. It's got creepy stuff. Marvel, you're absolutely right. You know, why would I want to read a story about these?
You get as far as the living creatures.
Yeah. You're like, what the heck's going on?
Shut that book.
Yeah, it's like,
You skip over it.
yeah, you skip over it. You're like, I don't want to read this because it doesn't. And this is probably where we're at with a lot of folks. A lot of people who've dropped out of religion, they look at this and go, this has nothing. This doesn't pertain anything to me.
Right.
You know, what do these creatures have to do with me? And they can't get past the symbolism. And so,
But the rest of it is just singing and praising and worshiping God.
mhm.
The whole rest of it,
Of this part of the text, yes.
yeah. So what does that symbolize back to?
Well, it goes back to that sort of way that people worship God. But the interesting part is, who are the 24 people? So we have to figure that out next, because you have so you've had this sort of connection with Ezekiel. The next question is, who are these 24 people that show up?
The 12 tribes times 2.
Could be. I'll have to add that to the commentary.
Mr. and Mrs. of the 12 tribes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well supplied with
Yeah.
And so that's
different varieties.
yeah. So so like I said, these are questions that people will ask and say, okay, so who are these 24 people here? And I think that answer is just about as good as any of the other ones they had come up here, I'll tell you that.
And they get to have white garments and golden crowns.
Well, they're elders, but how did they get to be elders?
Well, and that's, yeah.
Or are they prophets? Is it, Jeremiah and
So some commenters have who tend to find the source of John's imagery in some people see in the astral mythological tradition of Eastern polytheism. So some people say that as they look at this, they're like, well, other religions at the time had 24 people that they governed and stuff like that. Others interpret them as symbolic as 24 courses of priests from Aaron's priest line, so like from the Levites. A great many writers interpret the 24 elders as symbolic of the church in its totality, a combination of the 12 patriarchs and the 12 apostles. But this seems unlikely in that their song of praise definitely sets them apart from those who were purchased by the blood of Christ. So we have no idea who they are. So 24 sounded like a good number. I don't know.
he's probably just taking that number from what he knows in that day.
Yeah. So we had been harping about John using Jewish literature, and there's actually no exact counterparts to be located in any of the Jewish literature. It seems best to take the 24 elders as an exalted and angelic order who serve and adore God as the heavenly counterpart to the 24 priestly and 24 Levitical orders. So we don't know.
24/7, every hour of every day.
There you go. Could be that too. So okay, so we got through chapter 4. Let's look on to chapter 5. All right, so I need 3 readers. So first one, 1 through 5.
And I saw the right hand of him who sat on the throne, a scroll written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. Then I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose the seals?" And no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or look at it. So I wept much, because no one was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look at it. But one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals."
Who would like to read 6 through 10?
And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing, as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp, and with golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, Worthy art thou to take the scroll and to open its seals, for thou wast slain, and by thy blood didst ransom men for God, from every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and hast made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on earth.
All right, 11 through the rest of it.
Then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom, and strength and honor and glory and blessings. And every creature which is in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and such are in the sea, and all of them are in them. I heard them saying, Blessing and honor and glory and power to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb forever and ever. Then the 4 living creatures said, Amen. And the 24 elders fell down and worshiped him who lived forever and ever.
Awesome. All right.
A lot going on.
So there's a couple things going on in here. So what do you think the scroll is? Any idea what the scroll is?
The book of
What
life.
they read from the book. Yeah.
So that's many times the scroll can be seen as history, with the end of history. So this is sort of what the scroll is sort of seen as. It could be seen as sort of the end of all of history. Now, it's sort of ironic that, so they call Jesus at first what? Jesus, what are some descriptors from the text? What do they call Jesus at the beginning of the text?
It was a mighty angel.
Yeah, so what do they call, I'll be a little bit more specific here.
The lamb.
The Lamb.
The lamb, but before they call him the lamb,
Lion.
lion. Then one of the elders said to me, Do not weep, see the lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, had conquered so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. And then he turns, you're expecting, we're all expecting to see a lion, and what shows up instead? A lamb. So interesting. So again, we're seeing some of the, we're seeing a little bit of similarity between Ezekiel and Revelations. So in Ezekiel, in chapter 2 of Ezekiel, let's see, we're once again in Ezekiel, we're in chapter 2, a book of lamentations with word written on both sides is handed to the prophet. So in visions, so like in Ezekiel where we have those visions, stuff is being handed to the prophet. So in this case, the scroll, and in Ezekiel it was a scroll with written on both sides. Let's see. Some scholars suggested the scroll of destiny was in the form of a book rather than a papyrus roll. And so again, the scroll is basically talking about the end of history. Everything's all done. The angel who shouts is often cited to be Gabriel, but we don't know. So, but Gabriel's been talked about before in the text. So if you're wondering why they call Jesus the Lion of the tribe of Judah, this comes from Genesis 49, 9 through 10, where Jacob's final blessing on his 12 sons, Judah, is called a lion cub and is promised that the scepter shall not depart from him until he who comes to whom it belongs. So if you're wondering where that reference to the Lion of Judah comes from. Also, there was a particular writer, this is a 21st century writer, who took this to heart for one of his own characters for a book that you may have written or have read when you were younger. Narnia, yes. So if you're ever wondering why Aslan is a lion, and as a representative, so C.S. Lewis, if you've never seen The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe before, it's a movie you can watch, or you could read his book. But he uses a lot of Christian imagery. In that particular book, the lion symbolizes Jesus. And if you're wondering, well, why did he pick a lion? There you go. So, because I've had kids ask me before, why are they portraying Aslan as Jesus? Why are they showing him as a lion? I said, well, that's a biblical root. This stuff comes out of the Bible. So.
I have one little view in here that's kind of interesting about the four, the lion, the calf, man, and eagle.
Yeah.
And it says, these symbols show that all creation is represented before the throne. Thus, all creation is worshiping God. When you see those four, it's saying that all creation.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree. And then we get some more of creepy imagery again, Marvel. We get a lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes and
The horses.
exactly. So
But what is the harp and the golden bowls mean? with
so
incense?
the incense.
Does that mean just his death? Incense? Death?
Which verse is that from? I'll
8. Number
8. Okay. Let's see.
I'm still stuck on
Part
6.
of the praise.
The harp or lyre was a traditional instrument used in the singing of the psalms. So the instrument is typically used for the psalm. We don't do it like they didn't do it like we did today. Typically, psalms are sung with, we sing it with the piano, but they didn't. The golden bowls are full of incense, symbolizing the prayers of the saints. The use of incense was a normal feature in Hebrew ritual. So it was something, so as we call it nowadays, smells and bells. Some churches use a lot of incense. I don't, because a lot of people are very sensitive to incense. Catholic churches tend to have more smells and bells. Same with, yes, Episcopalians do. If you want, we could do a smells and bells service one time.
Oh, we don't want it to be mocked.
Well, it's not mocking I wouldn't call
Or
it
make
smells and
fun
bells.
of.
It's not.
Scratch your
No, it's
Where's the bells come from?
so so you can hear a bell when they.
Oh.
So when I say it's, I should say it's more shop talk than parody. That's just how we call it. So, but we could do an incense service if you want to do
That's a
that.
little bit- That sounds kind of more respectful.
So I don't know how many people you show up for it.
Yeah.
So
I'd
it's,
say it's just like getting like the Catholic.
yeah.
The Irish and Orthodox use it.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of it. So it's supposed to enhance worship, and there's certain rituals you would do in order to do an incense laced service. So I will watch my terminology. But yes, and so that's it's just a formality. It's just the way that. So in some sense, it helps create a mood. You know, it's, someone was saying scratch and sniff. Yeah, I mean, it gives you another layer of. So if you think of it as a tactile type of way, yeah, it adds another sense. Right.
Yeah,
It,
they
it,
use,
it can give you a headache. Yes, it can.
yeah,
So
but they use a lot of sense with, an OB with labor.
Right.
Calming and.
correct.
stuff like that.
So it adds a new sense of, so in a service, so the one thing that you've noticed that there's certain things that we hit during service. We sort of hit your sense of sight and hearing, and incense just brings another sense into it. So the more your senses are involved in the service, the more likely you are to get something out of the service.
We'd have everybody saying, Gethsemane Lutheran got everybody high this Sunday.
Well, even the gifts of the wise men were, the frankincense.
Frankincense and myrrh, yes. So yes. But yeah, so that's where those come from. So
And then it's more praising, but
Mhm.
they're saying it's thousands and thousands, so he's
Correct.
making it
That was a lot of people.
correct, very grand.
grand.
Very grand. Because I think a lot of times we, especially in the church nowadays, we don't see as much people around us as much. And to have this imagery, it's something, it's very powerful. Like when we do like when we have the worship for the National Youth Gathering, there's something powerful about having 20,000 kids in the same spot, singing together, having communion together. It's pretty powerful because you're just used to, you're 5 to 6 to 10 to 20 people that are in
Yeah,
your,
I went to a couple of the women of faith, and that was,
yeah, you have all these people, and we forget that we're part of a wider church. And this text reminds us that there are thousands and thousands. Well, there's 1 billion Christians in the world right now. Just think if we all got together to have one prayer service, what would that look like? And just the singing from that, what would that sound
Or
like?
the funeral of those
Yeah.
5 girls the other day, the thousands of people that
Thousands
were
of people, yeah.
out there for the funeral.
Remember Billy Graham was up in the cities and we all went up there. And thousands of people that were sitting up there.
These churches in the city that
Was
like
that the
10,000
youth
people.
theaters,
Grace Church.
Huge.
the sanctuaries were
They're on
just
Christmas
huge.
and-
Yeah. Well, just talking about huge sanctuaries,
Service.
if anybody's been to Central Lutheran, you want to see a big church. It's a Lutheran church. It is huge. This is where we normally have graduation,
Really?
but
Isn't Grace Church bigger?
it might be. But I
I've been
know,
there for concert.
yeah, you could do concerts easily in Central as well too. They sit a lot of people.
What
So
state is that in?
Central, Minneapolis.
Really?
Yeah.
Grace is just south.
Yeah, so you can't, like I said, if you ever go to Central Lutheran, it is, I don't know if they don't pack it in the inn like they used to, but like I said, when you have graduation, there, even with you, they have everybody from Luther who graduates there, and it still feels empty. That's how much space there is. I mean, they have, because normally Luther graduates 100 and 120, and they have all their family members in there, and it still feels like you could add 3 or 4 more graduations, and then you'd begin to fill it up a little bit. So, but yeah, you have this sense of that I don't think we get today. I don't think you get the sense of how big this God is, how big this, how big of a deal it really is, because we're so used to our small communities, and then you really get to see that tied together with, and I think it really is helpful to remind us that we are part of something bigger, a lot bigger. So let's talk about Marvel stuff. Well, I think it's important. I think, yeah. Why are they using this imagery? I think Marvel, you make a very good point. You know, what's the point of this stuff? I mean, is it just for shock factor, or is there something deeper behind it? And there is when it comes to so the concept of the lamb with 7 horns comes directly from apocalyptic tradition. Because I know you all have read 1 Enoch before. So in 1 Enoch 90. Verse 9, the macabres are symbolized as horned lambs. It is the lamb in the testament of Joseph that destroys the enemies of Israel. In 1 Enoch 90:37, this military leader is portrayed as a white bull with large horns. Rather than symbolizing innocent submission, the lamb in Revelation is a mystic, apocalyptic designation of the glorified Christ, enthroned with God and destined to be victorious over the opposing forces in the universe. The horns mean, they symbolize his irresistible might. So 7's the perfect number, and so the horns represent irresistible might. His 7 eyes speak of the completeness of vision, which leads to perfect knowledge. So again, his 7 eyes speak of the completeness of vision, which leads to perfect knowledge. So that's the reason why the lamb has those things on here. So he's mighty and can see all. Now, the paradox in that is it's a slain lamb, right? So the lamb that is slain. So that's the paradox of Christianity. We see might in stuff that is perceived as weak. So that's a paradox within the Christian church. So. Anything else about this part?
When it talks of the 7 spirits of God, what are the 7 spirits?
Yeah.
Maybe the very ending of 6.
Yeah. Very ending of 6. Let me go to find that. So we learned in 4:5 that the 7 spirits of God were 7 lamps blazing before the throne. But here, as the eyes of the Lamb, they have a mission to carry out on earth. So they're sort of similar to the 7 spirits we talked about back in chapter 4, verse 5.
And what was that?
Sort of the 7.
Remind me.
So those are the 7.
Torches.
Yes, the 7 lamps. The 7 spirits represent the 7 angels for each of the churches.
Oh, we're still going back to the church.
Yeah, so we're still so again, this piece here is the next piece right after the letters. So this is not so here's the weakness of Bible study. We talk about a certain amount of chapters each week. So the hard part, and the part that why Revelations are always hard for us, is we have a hard time remembering just from last time. And then you're expected to remember all this previous biblical knowledge. So that's where that's coming from. So it's coming back from 4:5, and you know the other thing too is when I remind you how many times a word gets used, that's again a callback to say that that's something that we're going to continuously see throughout all of the text. It's sort of like the courses I hated the most when I went through school were courses that said, "Yep, we're on chapter 4 of what we're going to be studying. You have to make sure you remember what chapter 1 as well as 2. They're not enclosed units, and so just remember as we read through Revelation, each chapter is not an enclosed unit. It harkens back to everything that happened before it. So for people like me, I do not like that. Give me my chapters. I just want to stay in that chapter. I don't have to worry anything about beforehand. But you do. You really have to remember what happened in the past, which is why we'll keep trying to call it out as we go through too. So,
I've got something too that says the seven spirits is a reference to the Holy Spirit from Zechariah 4,
There you go.
1 through 10. And it does have in there that, a bowl and 7 lamps upon 7 pipes, 7 lamps.
Yep.
In Zechariah too.
Yep. It can tie into that as well. That's the hard part. So like I said, the hard part of this text again is we have to know our Old Testament pretty well as we look into
This
this.
one is.
So yeah, so just so you know too, that's, you know, it makes it,
But I like the part where he talks about blessing and honor and glory and
Mhm.
might.
Yep.
You know, over and over, power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing.
Yeah.
I like that part.
yeah, absolutely. And just think of the people who are listening to this for the first time. People who are in situations where a lot of times the current government that they're under wants to exterminate them. People that, you know, in some of these, if you remember, some of the towns that they were in couldn't get a job because they were Christian. You know, people who didn't know where their next food was going to come from. You know, and into that situation, you have these words of hope. These words to know that what they're struggling with is not going to be what defines who they are. And so Revelations to them is hope. And so I think that's something to keep in mind when we talk about this text. Revelations is a hope-filled text for them because their lives suck, really suck. Not that ours don't at times, but theirs did. It really was
Yeah.
bad. It
Ours
was
is just different kinds.
right. We just have different kind of suckage. So
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
It is.
yeah, you can't compare. That was survival, now it's just
I was
hassle. It's a
Survival.
lot of hassle now.
well, but
But it's a survival for some people.
some
That's
people,
true.
some people, it's still survival today. Well, and you know, you can have. I think we have a lot less physical stuff, but we have just as
True.
much mental stuff. You know, I think people are probably going through more mental stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah.
or as I should say, as much mental stuff as they did back then. Because you think, you know, where we're at right now in terms of history, you think we would do a lot better with mental health. Well, suddenly mental health is actually coming to the forefront, and it's been how many years since Jesus showed up? I'm like, you know, we need to get our rear in gear and start, you know, having, all right, you know, talking about it. We should start having insurances pay for it. You know, we should see it and treat it. More facilities. I mean, we are really, people in 100 years from now are going to look at this time and go, you guys were really backwards back then.
Yeah.
Or 500 years from now. Boy, this was the dark ages. People didn't know anything about mental health then. You thought they were really enlightened. They thought they knew what they're doing. No, they don't. You know, we have a lot to learn. As much as we think that,
Ton.
yeah, as much as we think of what we do know right now, we have not even scratched the surface yet. You know, and so I think, you know, so I would just say that we're dealing with things differently. We probably don't have as much physical need, though you can make the case in very many countries, people still have the physical need. Yeah. We still have the homeless. We still have people we need to feed. You know, so as far as we think we've gotten, we've really not gotten that far. So, anything else? Anything else?
I was in here, it says, I'm troubled about the quality of blandness in our nation today, lack of creativity. It's apparent to our leaders. Most gear their lives to television ratings,
Yeah. Yeah.
afraid to take stands on issues.
Yeah, you're right. You know, and I think that's the hard piece. You know, and I think those are all good things. Because one of the things that I talk about sometimes is just how we numb ourselves. And I'll admit, I know I get home at night sometimes and I turn on the computer, watch some YouTube or do whatever. Oh, I think I'm doing research or I'm doing, you know, no, I'm not. There's stuff I don't want to do, so I just sit and watch.
Avoidance.
It's avoidance, it is.
And
We're very good at it.
Really good at it.
procrastination.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because when we have, like you said, Marvel, there's a lot more we could do. There's a lot more we could solve. So I just got done reading a book talking about the theology of hopelessness. It sounds a little corny, but it's a liberation theologian. There's a lot of different ways to look at theology within the Christian church, but the reason why he talked about hopelessness was because he said sometimes hope can lull us into a false sense of, eventually it's going to get done. And he said if we start thinking more with a hopeless type of view, we'd get off our keisters, he used a little bit more colorful language, and do something about it. And he says a lot of times we just assume God's going to get stuff done. Well, what if it was our mandate to do the stuff so it gets done? Because God is saying, hey, you need to do this. And we're like, oh, yeah, God will get that figured out sometime. And it's like, maybe we should be doing something about
Let
it.
somebody else do it.
Yeah, and that's what we feel. Well, someday somebody else will do something about it. We have that hope. And if we live more into hopelessness, saying God is asking us to do stuff, we need to get off our keisters and do it.
But we can always do it tomorrow.
Correct. So, yeah. Well, anything else about this book? Great conversation today. You guys are, you didn't think we'd get that out of 2 chapters, did you? So I think we're just going to do chapter 6 next week. Chapter 6, I think. Or do you want to try 7, or do you think that's crazy? I don't.
How many weeks do we have left in summer before we go back to,
Oh yeah.
so.
So how many?
See how it comes, so, next week.
There's 22 chapters.
All right, so we're only on 6,
3 or something.
Sail through it.
7,
Maybe we should
8, 9, 10. Yeah, we might have to double up, I think.
Maybe we should read 2 and then go
Yeah.
back and discuss both.
Yeah, we'll try 6 and 7 next week. Let's try 6 and 7. Let's get on the 2, just to make sure we get done. So 6 and 7.
Because this is too interesting to not do the
It
whole
is.
book. in
It is
the
really
end.
interesting.
Yeah. So like I said, it's interesting, and and like I said, I think it gives us a bunch of conversation to talk about. So at this point in time, we'll head on to prayers, and so I will stop my recording. And I say that so.